This is Jennifer Beamer, owner-operator of Expertly Dyed Herb by Science, and today we're going to talk about spinning silk hankies. Now, I know for some of you, you probably bought some of these either at a fiber festival or you saw them on Etsy or something like that, and you're like, oh, I just have to have them. They look so cool. And they have a lot of really great uses beyond just spinning. You can draft them out and you can knit with them, you can weave with them just as they are. You can incorporate it with your normal knitting, so if you're knitting with normal yarn, you can throw a few silk hankies in, drafted silk hankies in with that and knit with them held two together. You can use them for like felting projects. You can use this with a little bit of like a glue water paste and spread it out over some kind of canvas type thing and make silk art. So there's lots of really great uses for these silk hankies besides just spinning, but today we're going to focus on spinning silk hankies. So here are some silk hankies that I dyed, and unfortunately the light is a little yellow, so it's kind of hard to see how colorful they are, but they're kind of like a lime green and bright yellow mix. Yeah, well, you'll just have to trust me. So the first time I spun silk hankies, I ripped these little corners of my pinky fingers because I pulled like this, and oops, my wheel's right there. So I pulled like this, and the silk dug into that little crease on both pinkies, and I drew blood on both at the same time. So then I learned, well, silk is very, very strong, and if I'm not careful, it'll cut me. So here's what you gotta do, or here's what I like to do, and there's lots of ways to do this that other people have posted. So you can add this to your tips arsenal. So you have your pile of silk hankies, and each pile has several little layers. It's kind of like puff pastry. And what you're going to do is you're going to pull off one layer at a time. Now, if you have hand lotion, put it on now. There are two kinds that you can use. You can use a water-based or an aloe-based lotion, and that is better if you're planning to dye the silk after you spin, because what will happen is the oils will help condition your hands so that the silk doesn't snag on any skin or imperfections on your skin. And when you wash the yarn for dyeing, that will come off very easily. Now, if you don't use a water or aloe-based lotion and instead use something that has an oil or a fat, that's going to leave residue on the surface of your yarn, and unless you scour it before you dye it, there's going to be residue left on it, and that residue will prevent the dye from being taken up by the silk. So keep that in mind if you're planning to dye your silk after you've spun it. Now, the vast majority of times I've spun dyed silk, so for me it doesn't really matter. So lube up your hands basically, and then we're going to just pull a single hanky off at a time. Like this. And it's okay if it rips a little bit, because we're going to be ripping it some more. Okay. So I'm going to take my ring off because it's getting caught on it. That I can't condition, right? So here is my hanky that I've just pulled off from the stack. Okay. Let's reshape it a little bit so you can see. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get to do this video when we were doing the silk spinning challenge because I was already kind of pressed for time when we were doing the challenge, and then my laptop, I spilled water all over it, and I ran out of time in Korea, and then I had to wait for almost a month before I could get this laptop sent out for repairs. So yeah, it took a little while, but most of you guys figured out how to draft the hankies, so. Okay, here we go. We got the middle point here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of poke my thumbs through and use my fingers to sort of like pull the silk away from the opening. And then I'm just going to open a little bit with my thumbs. Now I don't like doing one motion. Sometimes you'll see people, they do this. Well, that's great for this lighter layer. So the layer that I had there was thinner than some other layers, so I'm going to pull off another one here and show you what I mean. So if I poke my thumbs through this one, okay, and I pull, this motion uses just these muscles. And if you have any kind of shoulder problems, or you're not that strong, you know, maybe you're older, or maybe you're a young kid. If you're spinning and you're like 8 years old and watching this video, you're awesome. So, you know, this might be like not a very good motion for you. This is not where you're strong. Where you're strong is this way, front to back, like this. So, like this, pulling, you use more of your shoulder muscles and your back muscles when you do this pulling motion, okay? And when you start drafting it further out, you're kind of punching forward with one of your arms. So if I show you like this, see if I can get it all in the frame. So if I'm stretching it like this, it's a little bit like a bow. And I can pull back and stretch it some more. Okay? My arm is straight. I'm basically using my arm as a stationary point that has all of this backing up the motion. So it's not me with a bent arm like struggling to pull this apart. I have seen people do that. I am holding it tight and then I'm pulling it back. So I'm using more of my muscles. Oop, now it's stuck to my pant leg. So don't think about opening it like this. This is a bad motion, okay, on your shoulders. So you want to think about doing a front to back motion. So front, back. And when you do them in tandem, you can actually draft out the hanky very quickly, like this, okay? I have a bunch of drafted hankies here in the end. So again, try to get this all in frame. So I'm actually pushing, or sorry, I'm pulling and I'm punching at the same time. So if you think about working against a fixed point where the line here is unbroken by a bent arm. So if I hold this out here and I draft against my arm, I'm pulling back and I'm using all of these shoulder and back muscles to pull back. And I'm not pulling like this where I'm using really weak muscles. Okay? So that's the best way I have found to draft silk hankies without hurting myself. But what about actually in practice? So I do something kind of weird. I will draft my hankies like this, right? But when I'm at the wheel, I will still keep drafting. Now this is counter to what most other videos will tell you. When you're drafting silk hankies, you draft it to the diameter that you want, and then at the wheel, you pretty much just insert twist. Well, that works for most of it, but sometimes like you'll run into a spot that's like, oh, I didn't get that one quite right, and then what do? Second you let go of that pinched off twist as you're spinning, you're either going to have a nightmare because the twist has gone into your silk hanky and you're just like, well, I can't undo this fat spot now because all the twist is in there. it's like literally playing tug of war with yourself. So what do you do? Like, should I try to draft it? And the answer is yes. So when we have done all this pre-drafting, what we're doing is we're breaking the silk strands a little bit each time we pull, so that when the silk is at the wheel and you want to draft it some more, you actually can. And I will show you what I do so that you don't get hand fatigue while drafting at the wheel. Okay, stay tuned. Welcome back. So here I have my wheel set up, and I have already a bunch of silk that I've spun up. Now I don't want a lot of twist in my silk because I'm going to add more twist to the ply. This is going to be a 3-ply when I'm done. So I'm using actually my larger bobbin setup here because I want the yarn to go on without a ton of twist. It's one of the great things about working with silk hankies. You don't need to have a ton of twist to get the yarn to stay together. You just need enough so that whatever your project you're working with is appropriate. So if you're going to spin a silk hanky yarn and you want it to stay fluffy, you could put less twist in and you'll have a very fluffy yarn. It might pill more and it might snag more easily, but you have that option. And also, if you want it to be real smooth and shiny and dense, you can always add a lot of twist into the single and a lot of twist into the ply, and you'll get that smooth, shiny, dense silk yarn with the same material. So that's pretty cool. So what I usually do when I'm going to find an opening for spinning, I'll just find the spot that's already the weakest link. So this is already a really thin spot. So what I'm going to do is just, with my thumb, I'm going to push into the yarn, or sorry, into the fiber like this. Push. I'm going to pull this motion. Okay? I'm going to pull out some of the wispy ends here. Now with silk, I like to overlap quite a lot. So when I'm nearing the end, I always make sure that I leave myself a good probably 6 inches or so, and then I overlap the ends like that, and I add a little bit of twist, kind of smooth the silk down a little bit, so that the wispy ends won't kind of get bunched up and then the silk yarn drafts apart at that spot. Okay, just gonna smooth this down a little bit. Like that. Okay. So I'm spinning a fairly thin single because the final yarn I want it to be probably a fingering weight, and certainly nothing thicker than that. So I'm doing my best to keep it as thin as I can. Now, when I spin silk, I kind of switch my hands around a little bit. So the point here is where we have the loose hanky and then we have the twist coming into it. So this is the yarn, this is the knot yarn, this is the fiber supply. So I pinch with my first finger and my thumb here on the top of the yarn. Okay, so I normally pinch under when I'm spinning, right? This one I pinch over the top like this, and I'm just going to, with the crease of my first knuckle here on the inside, I'm just going to grab that yarn, okay? And I'm going to hold in my hand the fiber supply. Okay, now I'm not going to stop treadling as I draft, and I'm going to have this motion where I'm pulling back and drafting, and then I'm going to let my fingers slide down into that new untwisted bit of fiber, and that's going to be the new yarn, and then I'm going to slide the whole thing up. Okay? So I'm actually drafting against my pinch. So this is the pinch, and I'm drafting against this fat part of my thumb. and I'm sliding with all of my fingers. I'm not holding it too tightly. I'm just making sure that the yarn stays between these knuckles, the crease right there. So when I bend my finger, that crease, that's where this yarn sits. Okay? And I kind of inchworm this whole way up. And you notice that I'm actually not pulling back very far. I'm pulling back about an inch or two, and these fingers slide up about an inch or two. And then I put it onto the bobbin, like that. I got a little fat spot there. I decided to draft it out before I slid up my fingers to allow that twist to go in. Okay. Now, you'll notice that there actually isn't a whole heck of a lot of twist. You see how this yarn is coming down like that? Had this been wool, when I release tension, you would have seen it start to curl up, like right here, immediately. But instead, this one hangs. And that's because when I go to put the ply twist in, I'm going to put a lot more in so that it forms a fluffy, though strong, 3-ply yarn, which is why I'm using the larger bobbin. And it's working well with the speed in which I'm drafting. So with this method, I never have any shoulder issues. I never have an issue where I've cut myself with the silk, and yet I can draft really quite easily. And if I get a fat spot, I can always go back and draft out a little bit more. Like that. Okay, I'm going to refocus the camera so it's closer to my hands and show you, because this is actually kind of a really fine, subtle motion that I'm doing, but it makes me able to spin silk hankies for hours without fatiguing at all. Okay, be right back. Okay, so I have my fingers pinched here. I'm going to curl these fingers around that yarn. So if you can see here, curl these around, and I can actually do a lot with this pinky finger. I can pull some out. I can kind of push and pull this yarn front going this way, left to right. I can pull it out from the wheel if I want. And then this hand is pretty much just the one guiding the fiber flow and drafting. Okay. Okay. So the result is a very nice shiny silk yarn that is very smooth and a very consistent diameter. Alright, I'm going to do just a stationary view so that you can see what my hand looks like as I'm spinning from the top down. So this is the first person perspective here, and you can see how my pinky here and my pointer finger here, where it's pinched, it's not straight out from the wheel. That would be like this. I have this small turn in my setup here. So if that's the wheel, this is my hand, and I'm obviously drafting from over there. Okay, so my hand is not turned so that the yarn comes straight in and then out here, or the other way around, goes from here straight into the wheel. It's turned 90 degrees. Now, the reason why I've done that is so that I have control over how much I slide. So let's say I only draft out an inch, okay? That's about how much I'm going to slide, okay? I can slide, right? But let's say I got to a real thin spot that was kind of long, like this. What I would do is I would be able to kind of inch my way down to that spot. If this were coming straight out, I'll show you what would happen. So if this were coming straight out, there's a chance that the yarn might slip out from my fingers, or it might dig into my fingers a little bit as the yarn got pulled. So this just 90-degree turn is an assurance for me so that I don't overdraft, or sorry, so I don't let the wheel take the yarn from me. And I have found this exceptionally prudent if you're making a really thin single like I am with this yarn. Now, this is just comfortable to inchworm my way down this fiber. You may find that this is a little bit pedantic, and that's okay. But I have just found that by having my fingers locked onto the yarn here and turned 90 degrees, not only does it feel better for my arm, but it's an assurance that the wheel isn't going to take unspun fiber out of my hands. Because remember, silk hankies, it's very difficult to take out the twist once it gets in there. So if it's not drafted absolutely perfectly for your standards, perfect for your standards, then you're going to have a real tough time getting that fiber. What happened here? I was talking, that's what happened. Then you'll have a real tough time getting the twist out of that fiber so that you can draft it again. Like that, okay? So by holding the yarn in my hand like this as I'm drafting, I can control a lot with these other 3 fingers. I can draft with these 2 fingers, and I can use these fingers as both the device for pulling out the right staple length that I want to spin, and also for managing the fiber supply. So I use these in tandem, like this, to inchworm down the length. I have a lot of control over this yarn. It's very thin, so it could be very delicate. If I don't get enough twist into it, it'll draft apart. If I get the intake too high, it'll just get ripped out of my hands, and that's no good. So if you've been wanting to spin hankies and your fingers get torn up or they get fatigued very easily, maybe you should try this method to see how it works for you. I don't know of anybody else on the internet who has done this before. This was just something that I happened across because I ruined my hands spinning silk hankies, and kind of searched on my own with testing and experimenting a method of drafting hankies at the wheel that allowed me to get the yarn that I wanted every single time without having to draft the hankies before I sat down at the wheel, because I'm very impatient. Sometimes, not always. Sometimes I'm really, really patient. But in the case of silk hankies, they're pretty much ready to go when you get them out of the package. So minimal preparation gives me maximal enjoyment, because if the mood suddenly strikes me, hey, I want to spin some silk, I can easily just sit down and spin some silk hankies at the wheel. And here we are at the end. Remember that you want a considerable amount of overlap. So generally what I do is I'll leave about this much, 6 or 8 inches, and I'll just kind of wrap this around like that, and I'll get my other hankies out, like this one that we already pre-drafted. Find the thin spot here, pop it open, or better yet, this way. Overlap it. Overlap those wispy ends. Add some twist. Oop. Add some twist. Like that. Smooth and draft. And there you go. You've added on another hanky. Hands don't feel sore, you don't feel tired. The motion is happening just right here, so there's not a lot of excess motion for you to have to worry about. And there you go. And there you have it. Some tips about spinning silk hankies. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Post in the comments below if you have questions about this video or other videos that you want to see on my channel. Let me know there. And as always, thanks for watching. Bye!